All right, well, I'm going to get things started here. People hopefully will continue to trickle in. I want to welcome everybody to our Peninsula section of the APA, our section Fall Forum. I'm Ben Broderick. I see a couple of names that I'm not familiar with, so I'll introduce myself. I'm the assistant or associate planner for the city of Port Angeles and the outgoing president of the Peninsula section. I've got until October 31st, I believe, to hold that tenure. And then I'm going to be handing it over to Kel Rowan, who will be our new president, and I'll be our outgoing or our past president. Thank you, Kel, for stepping up to the plate. We have two speakers today. Our first is Chris Comeau from Bellingham. He's going to talk to us about...
Ben.
Yes.
Announcements.
Oh, yeah. I'm just going to introduce them really quick, and then we'll go to you. He's going to be talking about alternative transportation planning in the city of Bellingham. And then Jade Aguilar from Eco Northwest is going to talk about practical applications of equity. But I'm going to hand it over to Gary. Sounds like he has some announcements.
Well, did you have any announcements, Ben? From
I have a couple. I wanted to go over some of the past year and do some year in review. But other than that, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Gary Eidelberg. I'm a senior planner at Department of Commerce, and had a few important announcements. One is that that you might be interested in. Commerce is hiring, and we've got quite a handful of positions, and you should check the website. Some of them are related to growth management, and some are related to climate change. So you should definitely check the website for the specifics and hiring on the positions. Our Sarah Fox, I don't know if any of you know her. She's been with the city of Vancouver City Council, is going to be joining Commerce, and she's going to be leading our climate change effort related to the proviso and GMA planning. And Ann Fritzl is going to be the housing manager. She's going to be working on things related to implementing the requirements of House Bill 1220. And we're also going to be looking to hire a deputy managing director. So if any of the positions that are available are interest to you, please please click on the links, and you can see how to apply from there.
Gary, I had a question. House Bill 1099.
Yes.
Wanted to know where that is and how what's going on with that one. That's the
House Bill 1099 died in the last session, and subsequently a proviso was sent to the Department of Commerce, and it was in essence asking us to prepare a guidance and model climate change chapters for cities and counties to use to address climate change mitigation and climate change resilience in their comprehensive plans. Now, though that was in anticipation of another bill being introduced in the next session that will be either a mirror image or an analog of House Bill 1099, and it looks like they were assuming that it would if the bill passed, then we would be by finishing the work on this proviso, we'd be ahead of the game in implementing a new bill.
Okay. I just got interviewed by a PhD student about it. That's all. That's why I'm asking. Yeah, it was a good interview. So I guess I just kind of want to go over the last 2 years in an annual meeting format and just let you all know what we've done as the board, and then what we're looking at in the future, and then maybe get some feedback as well. We only had one in-person meeting, and I felt like that meeting was pretty successful. We were able to use technology at that meeting too. We had some speakers that were out of the area that were able to call in and do their presentations in Poulsbo. I think that probably, I'm guessing all of our city governments are going to have that technology for hybridized meetings here, if they haven't already. I know that Port Angeles is really looking towards the future to have those in-person and hybrid meetings. And so it'll help us, just being so apart that we can actually just, Zoom in or however we're going to do it to meetings if you need to travel. I really feel like the board did a really good job getting some meaningful presentations. We had a whole 4-hour SEPA training. We really focused on equity. We continue to focus on equity. We had some presentations on community engagement and transportation, homelessness and housing, and also climate action. And we really tried to have our meetings be thematic so that we could get people from maybe not the planning profession involved. I know that our SEPA training, one thing that I've done is looked at basically all county leadership, city leadership, directors, tribal leaders, and I've tried to reach out to as many people as possible. I have a listserv now, and at our SEPA training, I know we had a lot of engineers show up, which I was really happy to see. I know that our engineering division, they struggle with SEPA a lot, and I think that was really meaningful for them. When it comes to the budget, I spent $100. This board spent $100, and that was to pretty much provide an honorarium for Doc at Peace Peloton for his presentation. We felt that was a worthwhile and meaningful thing to provide to his nonprofit organization. We had a budget of $1,000, so we're vastly under budget, and I think that's a problem, to be honest, because we're collecting dues and we're not spending them. Right now, we have almost $8,500 in assets. So one thing I want to continue to work with Kel on, and with all of you, is what can we do meaningfully with this money that we have to provide benefit to the section. I have talked to the state, and one thing that I did at the state level was really whip up all of our section presidents, and now we have a group that I think we'll start meeting more regularly as section presidents, and I'm hoping that some of our more rural sections, we can work with the state to maybe give some of that money back so they can provide something meaningful to the sections at a state level, because it's honestly sometimes hard to spend the money. Other things I've been thinking about, we have the ability to give scholarships. We have in the past given money for, AICP testing and training. The assistance for any speakers once we go back in person, or if, someone like Doc requests an honorarium or anything like that. We haven't had to pay for food. I know that we have a memorandum of understanding or agreement with the Department of Commerce to help provide us with food. But I think some of our more successful events have had, a luncheon basically, so that we can continue the conversation. And I think that's something that's meaningful and helpful. And the last really is technology. Commerce does bring technology to meetings, but we always could use a backup. That's something that we could provide funding for, whether it's a computer, just some kind of web-based small laptop that we can run presentations off of, and then a projector of some kind, so that we can have meetings, maybe not in government facilities, but support. I know that we had one in Chimacum some time ago at their Grange, I believe. That was really great. Or in Port Townsend, we had a meeting that was in one of their buildings on the pier, which was really great. So we're always looking for suggestions, basically, and we'll continue to ask, I think, ways that we can spend the money that's meaningful. Bylaws, we made one change to the bylaws, basically making it so that all of our county representatives are able to be appointed and not elected, because the reality is that people change positions and they move out of the area, and getting somebody else back in that seat is really helpful for the board. For instance, my coworker, Kevin, now works across the water in Shoreline. So we are in need of a Clallam County rep, basically, for the next 2 years. So anybody in Clallam County out there want to represent, let me know or let Kel know. I think lastly, let's see here. I had one more bullet point. We worked we reviewed the APA Washington website and specifically our sections page. And I think the reality is that the website is a bit of a mess, to put it bluntly, and tried to start the conversation at the state level. And I think that we're going to start really taking that under a microscope and hopefully getting some assistance to make the website a tool that we can use. I've accepted a position as what they call the COMCOM, the Communications Committee. I'm going to be the co-chair of that committee, and producing the newsletters. And I think part of that hopefully will be looking at the website as well. So with that, I don't know if any of you have any questions. I'll open up for any questions, but if there aren't any questions, we can go around. I'd like to go around and have everybody introduce themselves as a small group. I think that's something that's going to be good to do. And just say where you are and anything you're working on that you'd like to share. So first of all, are there any questions? All right, no questions. So the way this is going to go, I guess, what's going on in Port Angeles? There's a lot going on in Port Angeles, to be honest. We're working on a climate action plan. We just completed our greenhouse gas study. We're working on a major form-based code update for our commercial districts. And part of that is our building residential capacity grant. So we're doing a lot for our residential districts. So that's really exciting. We also have another major code update going on that is going to look at a lot of other chapters in trying to enforce the code. So that's just a few of the things that we're doing. And I'm going to pick somebody to go next. And then when that person is finished, they can pick the next person. So we can just continue the chain of people. So I'm seeing Jennifer Cannon.
I'll unmute myself. Hi, everyone. I have been involved as a Kitsap County rep. And so I've been to some of the sessions, and I just want to give a shout out to Ben for all his hard work. He's done such a fabulous job getting all these great speakers and sessions organized. I've really appreciated them. And it's nice to see other planners' faces in this remote world that we're in right now. So appreciate that. In terms of what I'm working on, I worked on a ton of housing action plans and associated with the commerce grants, and those all wrapped up. And I'm a consultant, so I work for lots of different people, lots of different communities, but I'm working on growth coordination plan for JBLM, a disparity study for City of Tacoma, climate action planning for Edmonds. And I do a lot of work with AARP. I'm one of their technical assistant consultants that helps with housing and other types of community planning needs for an array of different jurisdictions across the nation. That's what I'm working on. Should I pass it on to somebody else, Ben, or I'm going to pass it on to Jennifer because she's right underneath my little boxes. So.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm Jennifer Sutton, and I had been the secretary. What position am I going to be next year for the forum? Vice president? Or will I be secretary again?
It's up to you, I guess.
Yeah.
Sky's the limit. I didn't get a list. I didn't get a list of the nominations from Dinah, the secretary at the state level. So I know that we got a write-in for Jefferson County, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
You can be secretary again, though. Have at it. As long as it's not already taken.
I said that I would help. I said that I'd help in any way needed for the forum the next time around. But so yeah, second what Jen said, thanks for all your work, Ben. And I know that Kel is also just going to continue to do a great job. I am a senior planner for the city of Bainbridge Island. And let's see, we our city council has kind of been they've been talking about housing since we finished our last comp plan, but they've kind of started a couple different projects and maybe gone off on and then decided to do projects in different ways. So we are also at the very beginning of starting a housing action plan with this round of hopefully with this round of grant money. We will find out next week, and that'll be exciting. I had been working on a small sub-area plan that had finished at its advisory committee, that had started at the planning commission, but our council has kind of put it on hold. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. And I think that's it. Lots of little projects here or there. We're at the very, very early phases of starting to think about how to update our Winslow master plan. Some of you may know Winslow is the area of Bainbridge Island that's closest to the ferry. And so we've had a sub-area plan there for a very long time, and it's time to update it. So we're at the very beginning stages of that. And I call on Vicky. I call on Vicky because she's below me.
Hello, everyone. I got to be honest, I got invited here. I am not a planner. I am an engineer and I work for the city of Bremerton. And I got invited by Garrett Jackson, who is our planning manager, so I could come to hear Chris speak. And so I'm working on transportation stuff for the city. It's fun.
Welcome.
Thank you.
All engineers are welcome. We'll train you to be planners. And if you could pick a next person.
I'm going to pick Lindsay.
So Ben, are you going to say all lawyers are welcome too?
All lawyers are welcome.
I don't think you should say that. Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Stroman-Warren. I'm a city council member from Port Angeles, and I work professionally as a lawyer. And yeah, everything Ben's been doing is pretty awesome. One project that I want to throw out to this group is that counties now have the authority, and cities too, have the authority to pass the 0.1% sales tax just by a legislative action, not by a vote of the people. And there are some resources from the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance to help get county commissioners to understand the value of bringing in more revenue for housing work. So I find that for our work in Port Angeles, money is a limiting factor in being able to build out the permanent supportive housing and affordable housing that we need. So I'd be happy to connect folks with Beth Dulio, who's helping to coordinate that work if that needs to happen in Kitsap or any of the other counties. So thank you all for making these meetings open to non-planners. And please don't censure your comments about lawyers or city council members just because we're in the room. Thanks. And I will pass to Christopher.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Como. I am the City of Bellingham's transportation planner, and I've been invited to regale you with the sordid tale of how Bellingham became a multimodal focused city with transportation planning. And you'll hear from me in just a little bit, but I'll pass it off to, well, I don't know who's already gone. I really haven't been paying much attention, but Ben, why don't you pick somebody next?
All right, Josh, you're up.
All right. Good timing, actually, because I just got a phone call and I just hung up. So what are we doing? Just intros, right? All right. Well, great. I'm Josh Peters. I've been on the periphery and of the Peninsula section for many years, and at times on the inside. So I try to pay attention to what's happening. And right now I work for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I've had that job since mid-July. So I'm still coming up to speed. And let's see, just to comment on what Ben was talking about in terms of the services and the events of the last couple of years. I've been very impressed. So congratulations, Ben, and everybody else who's been involved in planning these events. It's been great to keep in touch, virtually or otherwise, and have these opportunities, and I'm really thankful for that. And congrats on your tenure, and welcome to the incoming president. And it's exciting times, right? And yeah, that's about it. Thanks.
I'll just pick on Ed.
Oh, hi, Ed Coviello with Kitsap Transit. So right now we're working on a long-range plan, which is quite challenging here in Kitsap County, both physical geography and the land use. It's difficult to serve with traditional transit, so we're looking at some innovative ride-sharing type programs, and also focusing on like little mobility hubs. But at the same time, in the areas where we think there's potential for transit supportive growth, we're looking at a couple high capacity transit routes. First one, probably the Silver Hill to Bremerton alignment along the SR 303 corridor. Pretty flat and lots of room for redevelopment. Some of that's occurring right now. That's in the transit world. And then part-time, I help out with the Peninsula Regional Transportation Planning Organization. I help their Black administer that RTPO. I do mostly the administrative tasks for that organization, such as invoicing and the RTIP, that kind of thing. So I'm just really happy to be here and listen to different perspectives and learn new things. And I think the last person would be Luke. Is that the last one?
Hi, yeah, I'm Luke Strong-Svedich. I'm the planner for the Jamestown Sklallam tribe just out of Sequim, Washington. I got invited to this meeting from our COO, and I have a background in planning. I think at the tribal level, planning is a bit broader than it is in like AICP's eyes, but the tribe's working on a bunch of stuff. I think housing is a pretty common theme. For Jamestown, it's a little different as a non-reservation based tribe. Most of the tribal citizens don't live on tribal lands. They live in the communities that we all share. So Port Townsend, Sequim, Port Angeles, Greater Clallam County, and Jefferson County. Couple big things we're working on is broadband expansion. Tribes were presented with a pretty unique opportunity to apply for a good chunk of federal funds to support broadband infrastructure. And I think the last year and a half, well, really the last 10 years, but the last year and a half, it was haves and have-nots. If you have the internet, you can keep working. If you have broadband internet connections, you could really excel. And if you didn't have that, you were kind of left in the dust. So that was a big priority. I think, yeah, coming up with a kind of regional housing plan is probably what's needed, because it doesn't, Port Angeles, kudos to Port Angeles for I think making the most progress, or at least the most groundwork towards progress. But really our whole region's impacted. We're competing with each other at some level. So housing is a big focus for the tribe. We are second largest employer in Clallam County, and our employees are having a hard time finding housing. Tribal citizens, the tribe does have housing inventory, and it just seems like it's everybody's impacted by the housing issues we face. Aside from that, do a little emergency management planning, work with the EOC folks, led the great shakeout this morning. We got some new tsunami sirens going off that had everybody pretty excited. Also temporarily covering some of the cultural resource issues. Our old Tipo went to work for the Clallam County Historic Society as executive director. We've got a new archaeologist coming on staff, but it's been something that's landed in my court as well. So it's, yeah, no shortage of stuff. But yeah, I'm happy to be part of this group, and I think that the more coordination that happens, the more progress that happens. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And Cal, you're our last introduction, and then we can move to Chris.
All right. Hey, I'm Kel Rowan, and it's going to be really difficult to follow Ben as the chapter president, but it'll be fun. And I know Ben set up a lot of stuff that should make it easy for me. Because of COVID, I transitioned from doing planning work to kind of operating our building planning and permit assistance center. So I do a lot less planning these days and more just the management, which I'm really, really enjoying that part. But I still have my fingers in a planned action EIS for the town of Belfair, which is at the north end of Mason County. For those who may not be familiar with Belfair, it's at the tip of the Hood Canal, where the Union River flows into the Hood Canal. And it is a small but booming town. So we are looking at, we had a 147 unit subdivision that we finished last year. And we're looking at about 500 units of housing going in there that are already in the works, and then lots more coming in. And it's crazy. I mean, there's only about 800 people that live there now. And there's also, we just had a pre-application conference for about 300,000 square feet of industrial park. Not quite sure what they are planning there. I'm imagining a warehouse distribution for, I don't know, crap that people keep buying. But you know, for us, that's totally unusual. So we're having to transition our rural single family residential development here and there to, oh my gosh, we're now city planners, what the heck? So hiring people, and yeah, it'll be interesting. So 2022, we could have like an amazing budget for the first time ever in a really strange time. So we'll see what happens.
All right, thanks, Cal. And I guess with that, Gary, would you like to introduce our speaker? I know that we're cutting into his time a little bit.
All right. Our first speaker is, as you heard, Chris Camo. He is the City of Bellingham's transportation planner. And over the past 20 years, he's created Bellingham's transportation plans, policies, and programs and has transformed these into multimodal projects throughout the city by securing $65 million in transportation grant funding. Chris has served on the Washington State Active Transportation Safety Advisory Council and on the national project team for the ITE recommended practice for multimodal transportation impact analysis. Chris has also served as secretary to APA Washington from 2013 to 2015, and as the president of the Northwest section of APA Washington, and as a Washington representative to the Transportation Planning Division of APA National. So, Chris, we'll welcome, and we'll look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks to Ben and Gary for that introduction. I'm going to go ahead and put my presentation up. I'm assuming I have the ability to do this share screen here. So if somebody could just give me a thumbs up that you can see my screen. All right, and then I will go over here and put it in presentation mode. So we're good to go. Now I've got a lot of information to share. I'm going to talk pretty fast, and so I'd really like to try to keep questions to after the end of the presentation. I think that way some questions may be answered as we go. But Ben, when he asked me to make a presentation, I was asking him what exactly he thought would be most beneficial for this group. And he said that basically trying to lay out how we got to where we're at. And so I'm going to take a trip down memory lane in a way and talk about all the different things that had to happen for us to get where we're at today. There's a lot, and some of it was not easy. Some of it took a lot of, there were battles, there were controversies, angst, of course. Anytime you talk about change in a community, there's always that. But I'll leave time at the end for questions and discussion. And then I apologize, but I have a meeting at 3:30, so I have to sign off then. And with that, let's just jump right in and see what happens here. So as I mentioned, there's a lot here. This is just kind of laying out what I want to share with you. I want to get you up to speed with Bellingham, talk about what we've done, some of the significance of what we did in terms of what's going on in the industry, the success that we've had, and then time for question and discussion. For those who are not familiar with Bellingham, we're 90 miles north of Seattle. We're 60 miles south of Vancouver. We're just west of the Cascades and just east of the San Juans. We're kind of in a little sweet spot. Our community is about 100,000 residents right now. We're pretty much a college town. We've got Western Washington University, Whatcom Community College, Bellingham Technical College. We've even got Northwest Indian College. And Bellingham is largely a place where people come for active and outdoor recreation lifestyles. It's also a retirement community in some ways. We're also the regional center. And in this graphic, you can see here's Bellingham in the context of Whatcom County, and here's the Canadian border up here. We've got a lot of inflow and outflow from the city. Of course, this is all pre-COVID. Things have all changed now. But because we're the regional center, we take on a disproportionate amount of transportation impact. We're also fortunate, though, in that we benefit from a lot of sales tax revenue generation for people coming to visit. And here's the influence that Canada has on Bellingham. As you can see, in these blue lines are kind of like rivers of traffic coming down from lower mainland British Columbia. And it's really important for us because you'll hear as I go, we have a transportation benefit district, and sales tax is the primary funding stream for all of our transportation projects. And so people coming to visit generate sales tax, and we rely on Canadian visitors. And it's been really rough the last 18 to 19 months with the border closed. That's changing really soon. So we'll hope that some of that comes back. And in Bellingham, with our transportation planning philosophy, I'll say, this is what's embedded in our comprehensive plan. We're trying to shift everything away from simply focusing on transportation as a conveyance system for automobiles and vehicles to one that focuses on the needs of people and how people get around. And so we're trying to focus on the most vulnerable users, and you can see the upside down triangle there with pedestrians on top. But we're also very cognizant of the fact that we still need to make sure that we balance the transportation needs because the system has to work for all user groups, including automobiles, which are a huge part of our economy. So balance is a really key piece of our strategy, but ultimately we want to plan for people, not just cars. And to that end, we've created several active transportation plans. You'll hear more about these as we go. The pedestrian master plan was created in 2012. Our bicycle master plan was created in 2014. And over the last couple of decades, we've been fortunate that here in Bellingham, the citizens have been really supportive of a multi-use trail system that's called greenways. And that's funded by a property tax levy, not sales tax. And that's been renewed 4 different times over the last 2 decades. All of these are integrated with one another, and we're going to be updating our pedestrian and bicycle master plans next year. In fact, the submittals for the RFQ just came in today. So I'll be distributing those and working with my project team to select a consultant and get going on those. The most recent thing that we've done is the beginning of this year, this last spring, the city adopted the Mobility for All ADA Transition Plan. And this is really important because not only is it a requirement to meet the federal ADA Act, but we want to make sure that all of our facilities, again, focusing on the needs of people, we want to be able to have people get to where they want to go in a safe and comfortable way without barriers for accessibility. And this plan takes it right down to the curb ramps and the curb lines and any other barriers that might prevent people having access to, public right of way or even into buildings. So this will become a foundation for the update to our pedestrian and bicycle master plans next year. So now I'm going to take you back to the future. I have to do this because the way that this all started was really taking a giant step back and asking ourselves, what is it that we're actually trying to accomplish? And this all started back in the early 2000s. Some of you may have been around or heard of, the Complete Streets movement. The National Complete Streets Coalition was formed in the early 2000s. And it kind of became a thing. The movement gained momentum. And in Bellingham, we already had a great working relationship with our transit agency, Whatcom Transportation Authority. And we were gearing up to do the planning for an update to our comprehensive plan. And to do that, we were starting to look at, population and growth forecasts and all of that, and getting into the Growth Management Act work. And part of that was working with the transit agency to kind of retool their system. And we all took a trip to Boulder, Colorado in 2002. And we learned about their transit systems, the hop, skip, jump, and all those branded high frequency lines that they have. And we kind of took what we needed and left some stuff we didn't feel we needed and came back. And WTA went through a service. They reoriented their agency. Basically what they did is, they have to balance, like we do, they had to balance the need for covering all areas of Western Whatcom County, which they serve, with trying to gain productivity by focusing on areas where they're going to gain ridership. So they established a primary transit network, and it had 4 high frequency GO lines is what they're branded as here. And at the same time, we were working with both WTA and our Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, which was the precursor to our Transportation Commission. And we developed a very long list of bicycle and pedestrian projects to incorporate into the transportation element of the comprehensive plan. And this was really kind of the start of changing the paradigm of our transportation system being a vehicle conveyance system to a system that looks at the needs of people. Here's just giving you an idea of the GO lines. In Bellingham, we have 7 compact mixed-use urban centers that are higher density, and they're all connected by these GO lines. They're very well connected with sidewalk and bicycle networks as well, more so these days than when they were begun. But the branding of the GO lines is such that because they're 15-minute headways in each direction, in other words, a bus comes every 15 minutes, no matter which way you want to go, you don't really have to have a bus schedule in your pocket. You can just rely on getting to the bus stop, and you know that within 15 minutes or less, a bus is going to come and pick you up and take you where you need to go. And that's the whole idea of these urban villages. They're supposed to accommodate about 30% of our expected population growth going forward. Of course, the other 70% has to be accommodated as well. And that's kind of the trick when we get into the comprehensive planning. Another thing that we did in our comprehensive plan in 2006 was, again, from Boulder, when we were there, we saw that they had adopted some transportation mode shift goals. And we thought that that was a really good idea. At least you have something to shoot at, a target to shoot at. And, you know, you try to be realistic, but you also want to be ambitious. You want to try to overachieve maybe. You know, it's always good to strive for more than you might actually achieve. And with what we're doing, I would call it strategic planning. You try then to also create a system where you have the ability to make adjustments as you go. In addition to that, you got to have a way to measure your progress and check in, and we'll talk more about that as we go. So we adopted these mode shift goals. It was a little bit revolutionary, you know, they're very ambitious, and you can see those up in the upper right corner here. I'm not going to go into those in detail, but it's really trying to shift mode shares from automobiles, especially single occupant vehicles, to the other modes, particularly walking and biking and transit, as well as at the time it was called carpooling. These days we call it rideshare, but that's an important thing too. And then after we updated the comprehensive plan, we switched our impact fee system from an administratively burdensome TIF zone system that had 18 individual zones to one that focused on one zone citywide. And it was based on the Supreme Court's decision in Olympia that was challenged by a developer and upheld. So we said, yep, we want that one. So that's been in place. You'll hear more about that later. We've since shifted that up. But that was pretty revolutionary too, because it allowed us to be much more efficient and equitable, actually, than the previous system. Then the big thing came in, well, we adopted our comprehensive plan in 2006. And at that time, the Growth Management Act was requiring everybody to have these transportation concurrency ordinances. And for those who aren't familiar, we'll get into the details of this, but it's basically trying to say, okay, we're expecting a certain amount of population growth. How are we going to make sure our transportation system is adequate to serve that growth? And of course, key to that is how you define adequate. But we told our city council and the public that, you know, look, you've got all these ambitious goals for infill development and multimodal transportation, but you're still using this methodology, these metrics that came out of the National Highway Capacity Manual, and they're really not meant to be used in a densifying urban area. You're going to quickly run into a situation where you're going to see that at intersections in the downtown core, you're not going to be able to maintain the measured vehicular level of service at the peak hour, as any downtown core would not be able to. And so you're going to have to deny development permits, which is what the Growth Management Act says about concurrency. We'll get more into this as we go. So we went ahead and adopted the comp plan with a VC-based concurrency methodology, but we warned our council that we're more than likely going to have issues with this, and we'll be back to talk to you when that happens. And sure enough, we ran into a problem, and then the council finally relented and let us create some new methodology. We created multimodal performance measures that included measures for sidewalks, bikeways, and transit. And we became the first city in Washington to implement a truly multimodal transportation concurrency system. And this was a fundamental paradigm shift because it completely blew past what the industry standard was, the volume to capacity ratio being used by most cities. So getting right into it, what it comes down to is with transportation concurrency, no matter what methodology you adopt, you're going to get what you measure. If all you count is cars and car traffic, then you're going to have mitigation that is focused on cars and car traffic. It's not going to do anything for pedestrians, bicyclists, or people riding transit. And that's really the fundamental problem with the way things have been done in the transportation world for a really long time is there was this tool that was developed during the highway building era, and people just kind of took it off the shelf and said, oh, hey, let's use this one. Well, it was never meant for use in an urban area. This is what the Growth Management Act says about what needs to happen in your comprehensive plan in terms of, internal consistency between land use and transportation. It literally is telling you that the focus of the transportation element is to implement the land use element. So if you're trying to adopt a land use element that's calling for infill development and higher density development, then you really need to have some metrics that are going to help you allow transportation facilities that aren't going to not allow you to focus on infill development. And unfortunately, what you'll see as we go is that, it's like trying to pound a square peg in a round hole with this VC ratio in a downtown environment. So concurrency, also known as adequate facilities ordinances, are, again, as I said earlier, you're basically just trying to balance, okay, I've got a bunch of growth that's supposed to happen, and the state law says my transportation system has to be adequate to serve that level of growth. Well, what does adequate mean? Well, thankfully, the Growth Management Act in Washington State allows every jurisdiction to define adequate for themselves. Nobody at the state level is dictating to any city or county what kind of methodology they have to use. They're simply saying that you have to have a concurrency ordinance and you have to enforce that and maintain those level of service standards over time, whatever those might be. Unfortunately, most cities just default to what was available, the easy pull off the shelf metrics that were used, and this is what they look like. For roadway segments, arterials, you're just putting down a tube or a magnetic counter and counting the number of cars that go by in a certain period, usually at the highest demand period of the day, the evening rush hour. And then you're just making determine an arbitrary, design capacity is assigned for the arterial roadway. And then you compare those, the traffic volume versus the capacity, and you say, oh, well, it measures at this level, so we're going to say it's adequate or not. We'll talk more about that in a second. Or you go to intersections, especially in urban areas, and you measure seconds of delay per vehicle. Well, both of these are vehicle-centric metrics. And so obviously it's great if you want to know what's going on the vehicle side of things, but it doesn't tell you anything else about what's going on in the transportation system, which is not just about vehicles. As I mentioned, it's typically done at the highest demand period of the day, which is typically the evening rush hour, at least pre-COVID it was. And this graphic just kind of lays it out. There's a huge amount of transportation capacity, even if you're only measuring for vehicles, that's completely underutilized throughout the day. And yes, it's important to understand what happens at the highest demand period of the day, but that's not the way that you should look at, quote, fixing your transportation system, and certainly not how you should be programming your limited resources to try to go deal with your transportation issues. If you're just going to throw money at a congested intersection over and over and over again and keep widening and widening and widening, you're not going to solve the problem, and you're going to be not addressing a whole bunch of other issues on the system. So we really tried to hammer this home to the council and the public with somewhat limited success for a while. To take the conversation a little bit further, once you make these measurements, the highway capacity manual, then somebody back in the 50s or 60s decided that, gosh, you know what? Let's be really creative and assign letter values to these measurements. Unfortunately, the values that were assigned are kind of inverse to what people are used to bringing home, like the school grade report card, and you can see it here. Level of service A, a lot of people would say, gosh, yeah, we want all our roads to perform at level of service A. That means they're excellent, right? Well, no, it's saying that they're underutilized. If an economist was looking at this situation in terms of return on investment, the economist would say, well, you want your road to function at 100% of its design capacity, right? That's how you're going to squeeze the most value out of that investment. Well, how's the public going to react to saying, no, we need to adopt level of service E? And at peak hour, some of them might have to function over that and be at level of service F. Well, F, that's failure. That can't be acceptable in the public's mind. And unfortunately, a lot of engineers use the term failure out of context. Yes, from a situational standpoint, you might consider that something has failed. That doesn't mean that it's the intersection's fault that failure has occurred. It's really a failure of the metric actually measuring the entire context of a situation. And it's a very limited lens through which you're looking at then. It also is completely focused. Again, it's on the peak hour, which is extremely limited, as you saw in that graphic. So over the course of 3 years, taking it from when we first proposed this idea, when we were taking the comprehensive plan through the public process with the Planning Commission and the council, until we were able to actually develop and get new methodology adopted, these are some of the actual headlines that appeared in our local newspaper. Obviously, the editor was waking up on the wrong side of the bed, seems like every May or June of each year, and really didn't like what we were doing down at the city. And so this is what we battled for 3 years. I was public enemy #1. But really what it comes down to is, again, taking a giant step back and asking ourselves, what is it that we are actually trying to accomplish here? You look at what the GMA says, you look at the common approach that's been taken in cities across the United States. You look at how that gets implemented. And again, if all you're going to measure is vehicle traffic, then your mitigation is going to be vehicle focused. Because of that, as we warned our council, we had to establish a development moratorium at the height of the housing bubble in 2007. Of course, that wasn't popular, but that's what the law said. So we were finally able to convince them that using these, common metrics off the shelf isn't going to allow us to achieve the goals that we've established as a community that are consistent with the GMA goals. And of course, you do the same thing over and over again, and it just leads to insanity, as Albert Einstein alluded to. And from a methodological standpoint, if all you're going to do is measure cars, mitigate for cars over and over again at the highest demand period of the day, which is an extremely limited time period, this is where it takes you. This is the logical conclusion. These are actual photographs from California. This intersection on the left has been continually widened. And in this case, it was for I think Facebook headquarters or something like that in Silicon Valley. But look what's happened there. Look how long the pedestrian crossing has become and how safe and comfortable somebody might feel trying to get across this behemoth intersection. And then look at this freeway in California going through one of the passes between Los Angeles and San Diego, I think it is. I've counted the lanes and I think it was 23 lanes wide or something ridiculous like that. And you can see that over time lanes have been added. And it's throwing good money after a bad situation. You're never, ever, ever going to solve that problem. And you've probably all heard about induced demand. Well, there it is in photographic evidence right there. So we tried to change the entire transportation paradigm here in little old Bellingham. And we tried to bring our council and public kicking and screaming into the 21st century by trying to get them used to the idea that, you know, we say we're planning for this particular land use context and we want to plan for people, but we're really not giving ourselves the tools to do that. And so we all need to take a step back and be realistic and say, you know what? Traffic congestion is a normal condition in an urban environment, especially at the end of a workday, the local rush hour. And we can't build our way out of this, especially if our goal is to try to limit sprawl and focus on infill development. We need to create tools that acknowledge that there's congestion, but look at other things too. And so that's where we went. We wanted to develop performance measures to allow us to get what we wanted and what we had established as goals in our comprehensive plan. That meant that we needed a whole suite of different measurements, and this is what it looks like. This is literally our level of service that we've adopted here in Bellingham. We use pedestrian, bicycle, and even trail performance measurements. We consider trails a secondary form of the transportation system. People use it. It's less direct, but it's often seen as more safe and comfortable by a lot of people. And people are willing to use it in certain instances. So instead of just measuring vehicles and volume to capacity ratios, we still do that, but it's only one of 5 variables that we measure now. We also carved our city up into these little mobility sheds that we call concurrency service areas. And the whole point of doing this is to get at that land use context piece. There's no way that you're going to find the same kind of situation in the core of the city versus out at the outer edge of the city. And so what we're trying to do is acknowledge that, okay, yeah, there's traffic here, but let's look at the facilities that are available and the land use context. And let's adjust then using, weighting factors to acknowledge the land use and transportation context of the situation. So what we do is we've coded our urban villages and we've emphasized non-motorized modes and transit in these areas. And in the outer areas, we've emphasized that, there actually really aren't that many facilities for biking and walking and transit out in these outer areas. So they're kind of more auto dependent. And we acknowledge that. And the way that we do that is using what we call policy dials. For each one of these areas, we apply these weighting factors and we adjust it accordingly to reflect the land use context. And that allows us to have a relative comparison across the city. The other thing that we did, and this is really fundamental, is because we weren't just measuring vehicles, we converted everything to what we call person trips. This was all done before there was anything called multimodal level of service, which wasn't introduced until the 2010 version of the Highway Capacity Manual. And we were doing all this in 2007 and 8. And so the idea of person trips is that you understand that, a car can carry more than just one person. In fact, we'd very much like it to carry more than one person. And we have to acknowledge that there's land uses that certainly create trips, but not just for cars. People are walking, they're biking there, they're taking buses there. So it acknowledges that trip making. And what it does then is it takes the old tried and true ITE trip generation manual and it takes it beyond just vehicle trip generation. We'll hear a little bit more about that as we go. Then we mash it all up. We got motorized modes on the left and non-motorized on the right. And we bring it all down to the bottom with the land use context and we come up with person trips. And the way that we report that each year, we publish a transportation report on annual mobility. It's kind of like a progress report or a report card. And this is like a ledger. And each year it's showing us what each of these concurrency service areas has available to offer development in terms of capacity, not vehicle capacity, person trip capacity. And it's kind of like, the analogy we use is kind of like a personal checking account. If there's money in the account, if there's a positive balance as a developer, you're good to go. You get a concurrency certificate. We've tried to make it simple and easy. However, if there's not enough person trip capacity, we allow you to propose some concurrency mitigation tied into our pedestrian and bicycle master plan. So a developer could go build 100 feet of sidewalk or something, earn enough person trip credits. It's like making a deposit in the bank. And that way you can earn enough person trips to get through the concurrency process. Anytime we, the city, or any private developer adds sidewalk or bike lane to our transportation system, either through private development or capital projects, that's like making a deposit in the bank as well. So we keep track of all of this by concurrency service area. We report it each year in this document. It's online. And by the way, everything highlighted in this bright blue text throughout this presentation are links to our website if you want to go explore more resources. So that's the long and short of it with concurrency. It was a really big deal, but it allowed us, it kind of broke down a bunch of barriers and allowed us to continue forward making progress. And in 2010, pretty much right after we got through all this concurrency nonsense, the city, were able to establish a transportation benefit district. And there's a couple ways you can do that according to state law. You can do license plate tabs, but we, being in close proximity to Lower Mainland BC and enjoying that visitation from outsiders, decided to go with sales tax, which was brilliant because it gives us a way to have people coming into the city help pay a portion of the cost of our transportation improvements. And that was approved by 58% of the voters. That's important to remember as we go. And then shortly after that, we wanted to further incentivize the land use side of things and really focus on these urban village areas. So I created this thing called the Urban Village Transportation Impact Fee Reduction Program. And what it did, it looked at the ITE trip generation rates being, completely vehicle focused, also largely suburban focused, not recognizing the reality of compact mixed use centers so much. And I spent about a year doing research and figured out a way to offer up reductions for development in these urban village areas because we could show that it was going to generate less vehicle trips than other parts of the city. That program's been in place since 2011, and it has saved developers over $1.3 million in transportation impact fees as an incentive to get them to do the right thing and develop in these urban village areas. And that's been super helpful. Continuing on, 2011-12, we, as I've already covered, we developed our pedestrian master plan. 2013, we developed our bicycle master plan. These are citywide, they're extensive networks. We've been implementing it ever since then. We incorporated those plans into our 2016 comprehensive plan update. And then in 2018, we took our transportation impact fee system to the next level by making it multimodal and focusing on person trips rather than vehicle trips. And we worked with Fair and Peers consultants to get at this. And it's, again, getting at the idea that it's not just vehicle trips that are being generated. It doesn't matter if you're in the urban village or any other part of the city. The reality is people are making trips other than just by car. And so with our impact fee system, what we were able to do in turning it into a multimodal system is incorporate the pedestrian and bicycle plans and networks into this system so that when we charge impact fees now, the impact fees can be used for standalone sidewalk and bicycle projects just as legitimately as any kind of vehicle capacity project you might have in your city. In 2020, Bellingham voters reapproved the local sales tax. It was rebranded from the Transportation Benefit District to the Bellingham Transportation Fund. And it was approved by not 58% of the voters this time, but 82% of the voters, because they obviously like what we're doing here. And we've done a lot. And so in 2019, we started getting a lot of attention from the state and even nationally, because all of the implementation work that we've been doing with our pedestrian and bicycle master plans. And in 2019, we got credit for implementing over 50% of our bicycle plan in just 6 years, which was pretty remarkable. And we're pretty proud of that. And then just last year, Bellingham became one of only 2 cities in in Washington that were rated as gold level bicycle friendly communities, and only 1 of 34. We'll talk more about that in a second. But from an implementation standpoint, this slide shows you what we've been able to accomplish in the last 10 years since the Transportation Benefit District was formed. On the left, you see bicycle and pedestrian modes and the networks building out. And on the right, you see the different funding sources that were used. And we're very fortunate to have the Transportation Benefit District shown in purple there, as well as grant funds and some private funds. And then importantly, we've really focused our pedestrian and bicycle master plans on low-income neighborhoods. And that's what this is showing, is that the vast majority of our projects have been in these low-income neighborhoods because we baked those criteria right into those plans. We weighted them more heavily than other factors. In addition to that, here in Bellingham, we've decided to really slow things down, and most of our city, in fact, almost 80% of our street network has speed limits of 25 miles an hour, and only a few have speed limits over 25, and only a couple have speed limits over 35, and they are at the outer edges of the city. So here's what we were able to do for the pedestrian master plan since its adoption: 80 sidewalk and crossing projects. And then, as I mentioned, over 111 bicycle projects. And we got a big governor's award for the rapid implementation of our bicycle master plan. And as I mentioned, League of American Bicyclists has rated us as a gold bicycle friendly community now. We're very proud of that. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we've just adopted our ADA transition plan, Mobility for All. We'll be using that as a foundation for updating our ped and bike plans as we go. We've been collaborating all these years with WTA, most recently on their long range transit plan titled WTA 2040. And then they are going to be helping us with a high frequency study that they've got going next year. We're jointly funding that, the GO lines. And of course, we're going to be updating our own pedestrian and bicycle master plans. We're very lucky to have WTA as our transit agency. They're amazing. They provide excellent service. College students rely heavily on transit to get to campus because of the parking issues. We take time to fund transit in our 6-year TIP, thanks to our Bellingham Transportation Fund. We've got our Climate Protection Action Plan and WTA's plans, and we want to make sure we're contributing funding to those important measures, including upgrading all of the bus stops in town to ADA standards. And that's what this slide is showing you. There's a bunch. We've got a lot of work to do. And of course, making sidewalk and bicycle connections to the bus stops. So this slide is just showing a whole list of different resources you can go find on our city webpage that tells you more about what we've done with transportation here in Bellingham. And that concludes my presentation. And it looks like we have about 15 minutes or so left for questions and discussion.
Thanks a lot, Chris. That was a great presentation. A lot of information. And
My pleasure.
I'm just amazed at how fast all of that came together. To be
Well, I don't know
honest.
if I'd call it fast. It's 20 years of my life.
I guess my first question would be about the private sector and the development community and how you were able to convince them that this was a good idea. Because obviously it was, they saved money as you demonstrated, but how are you able to get them on your side, or did you have to drag them kicking and screaming?
Well, as you might imagine, having to pay money for anything is never a popular thing. And of course, developers, they'd like to pay less or nothing in a lot of cases. But I think we've spent so much time working with and educating our public that even the development community at some point was able to understand what we were trying to accomplish and became less obstructionist, especially with impact fees. That took a long time. The concurrency stuff, I would say that I'd characterize that more as, it just takes time to change paradigms. And, if you've got a bunch of old school thinkers at the table and dominating the conversation, you're not going to make a lot of progress until there's different voices at the table. And so you really have to be open and willing to trying new things. And of course, you also have to ask yourself if do I really have the right tools to accomplish the stated goal? And ask other people, say, look, I hear what you're saying. You agree that we should do this kind of land use. Are you going to give me the tools to put in the toolbox to get there? Because if they're not willing to do that, then you can't accomplish the goal.
Hey, Chris, have you done any correlation between what you've been doing here to improvements in air quality and maybe greenhouse gas emission reduction?
Well, you could do a back of the envelope kind of calculation in terms of, what you see grow in number of trips or vehicles and miles traveled, and then, equate that to emissions. But, it's not just the city of Bellingham that's producing emissions. And like we talked about in the presentation, there's lots of people coming in and out of the city each day. It's not just city residents, and, there's visitors, and obviously, we can't control the airflow in and out of the city. I mean, but if you're just talking about it in terms of emissions from vehicles, we could do something like that. And certainly our climate protection action plan looks at those issues from a transportation standpoint. But I don't have that at hand to talk about.
Well, okay, we've got a couple of other questions. Ed, I think it's for Ed.
Hi, I'm a transit planner down at Kitsap Transit, and really interested on that bus stop improvement program up in Bellingham. The reason I ask is when we want to do minor work at a bus stop, maybe replace a pole or move a bus stop, that kind of thing. It's, some jurisdictions, it depends on the fee. We have to go through the permit process, and it's $300-400 every time we do it. The staff are nice enough to lump in, we can do several bus stops at once. But it doesn't feel like a partnership. It feels like we're an outside private person paying government to improve their community. And I'm wondering how that was made possible in Bellingham. Do you think that atmosphere of the university town helps?
I think the university does help. I think that one thing I didn't mention is all university students have bus passes in their pockets. They voted to make that part of their tuition. So that's an awesome thing. That's why 40% of WTA's ridership is college students. The university also does a great job to try and dissuade students from even bringing their cars to Bellingham, but the ridership from the university is huge. In terms of our partnership with WTA, it's a long-standing partnership. They partner with us on our big corridor projects. They'll kick in some money when we go after grants. We do the same thing for them. But when it comes to these kinds of upgrades, it's tied right into our plans as well, because we're focused on people, not just cars. And so when we have the Bellingham Transportation Fund, which is sales tax money, the way that we offered it up for the vote to the public was, look, if you approve the sales tax levy, we're going to use it for arterial resurfacing, non-motorized pedestrian and bicycle projects, as well as climate and transit. And we lump those into a category we call clean energy. So we're taking on climate initiatives that are transportation related, like putting in electric vehicle charging stations all over the place, as well as transit needs to, transit supportive things. We're not a transit provider, but we work hand in glove with our transit, regional transit partner, WTA.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Mhm.
Jennifer, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks. So I have a question about the Urban Village TIF reduction program. So does that mean how many tiers of TIF fees do you have? We adopted a TIF maybe 4 years ago, and we have 2 tiers, one for single family and one for multifamily and accessory dwelling units. That's maybe half of the single family fee. But I'm just curious how you work it with, is it just geography that dictates the TIF, or is it geography plus unit type?
So I will tell you that there's a link in there to explain it in more detail, but what I'm gonna give you the quick and dirty version. So the urban villages, they're compact mixed use areas, and there's a lot of research now that shows in those kinds of environments, you're gonna have less vehicle trip making and more person trip making. And it's all because of things called internal capture, which, mixed use is responsible for. But the way ours works is in any one of the designated urban villages, which is served by transit, what we acknowledge is the mixed use environment gets an automatic off the top. Developer doesn't have to do anything to qualify for this. It's automatic 15% reduction over what the ITE trip generation manual would indicate for vehicle trip generation. And that's to account for the internal trip capture, as well as the fact that there's pedestrian and bicycle facilities and transit provided in these areas. And then in addition to that, we give a 7 to 10% reduction for the actual proximity to the transit. If you're on one of these GO lines, you get a 10% reduction. Again, it's automatic. If you're within a quarter mile of a GO line, you get 7%. So there's almost no part of any urban village that doesn't at least qualify for that 7%. A quarter mile walk is like a 5-minute walk. And so you can always be within a quarter mile of a GO line in any one of these urban villages. So automatically off the top, a developer is going to get a 22% reduction for building in these urban village areas. Some of them get 25. And then on top of these automatic reductions, we've offered up some voluntary things. A developer can voluntarily upfront purchase 2 years worth of transit passes to distribute to the occupants of, say, apartment complexes, or an employer can do that for their employees. We offer an additional reduction for car share that can be provided, say, in an underground parking garage, or these days you could work bike share into that. All sorts of different ways that a developer can earn these credits. For large employers, we go to the CTR reduction, 10%. That's what the state law calls for as a goal. So we offer up to large employers another 10%, but we cap the reduction at 50% maximum. And so there's been a couple developers who have reached that 50% maximum. And it's great for the urban village areas. It's helping them to develop with infill, higher density development. And it's helping the developers by cutting down on that cost, because they're taking a huge financial risk to develop in these areas.
Vicky, you had your hand up?
Yes, thank you. Chris, I got to say, I love all of the things you spoke of. Yes, it's a lot of information, but I'm always about when it's time to ditch the old principles or guidelines that we've used for so long that really don't apply. I mean, we need to analyze that and do it as necessary. So I love all of the innovative stuff you have done in Bellingham. My question, I hope, is simple. I'm hoping you're going to share your presentation with us. Would we have access to that?
Yeah, I've already sent a PDF version to Ben, and he can distribute that out. And like I said, all of the text that's shown in bright blue are live links to our website. So you can extend the presentation and go, down a rabbit hole however you like.
Great,
And-
I plan to do that.
And I'm always available for questions. My contact information is at the end, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you've got additional questions.
Much appreciated. Thank you again so much.
You bet.
Yeah, I plan on making it available when we get to recording so we can just do it all at once. So for everybody knows. I have one last question. I'm wondering about the Bicycle Advisory Committee. We've struggled with ours, and I wanted to know how. I know that it's a part of the, it's a requirement for being a, especially a gold member of that organization. But was it council action that helped with that, or how did you guys get that up and running really well?
So back in the day, we had something called the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. They were appointed by the mayor, and it was mostly bicycle and pedestrian advocates working with Public Works. They were appointed, they would make recommendations, and those recommendations could be carried up to the city council as we presented stuff. And it was really helpful. They were really focused on the bicycle and pedestrian side of things. But around 2008 or 9, a city council person who took a shine to Boulder, Colorado, decided that because they had a transportation commission, gosh darn it, we needed a transportation commission. So they morphed our parking commission and our bicycle and pedestrian advisory commission into one transportation commission, absorbing both of those responsibilities. And it's been an interesting experience. I feel like we accomplished a little bit more with just the bicycle pedestrian advocacy side of things. It was really focused on a particular topic. Whereas the Transportation Commission, it's a little bit broader scope. We've struggled to get broad representation for all aspects of transportation. That it's kind of tough to get volunteers from all different sectors. But we have an official Transportation Commission now that looks at a lot of these issues, and they also take on all the parking commission responsibilities. So it was formed by council. And I'm not going to lie, it's been difficult to keep staffed up to full capacity, and it takes a lot of time to staff the Transportation Commission. It meets once a month, but it's a good group to take proposals to and get their feedback and tweak things and adjust them as we go forward to City Council.
All right, it looks like we ended right in the nick of time for you there. I just want to say I really appreciate your presentation and you're taking the time to meet with us virtually today. It's been
My
wonderful.
pleasure. And for all those, Ben, you're becoming a past president. Have fun with that. I am just hanging up my hat. I've been past president of the Northwest section. Was only supposed to be a year, but then COVID came along, so I volunteered for another year. So anyway, good luck to everybody volunteering with the section, all those folks at Commerce. And I apologize I have to leave, but I got to get to this other meeting. So good luck to everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
We appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
All right, now I guess we have a 15-minute break scheduled, and we'll meet back in the same place, and we'll hear from Jade. I'm really excited for this presentation. I thanks to Jennifer for setting this one up. Jennifer Cannon, I should say.
Thank you.
Jennifer is Jade, just really prompt.
She's here. I see her.
Oh,
I'm
there
here.
she is. Welcome.
Thank you.
Is everybody ready for the storm?
Uh-oh.
What storm?
Yeah, exactly.
Strong Northwest history. They're saying they're already predicting it to be the strongest storm in Northwest history.
What?
Wow.
Yeah, we'll see. But
I feel like Port Angeles either gets completely missed by those things because of the rain shadow, or we just get everything slammed into us. Like the last few years with some of our snowstorms, it's like you go to Squim, there's 2 inches. You go to the Elwha, there's 2 inches, and then Port Angeles gets like 35. What? I'm guessing with this one, it'll just, I get all excited about that stuff and then nothing happens.
I just made sure that we have a lot of water. Have some candles, flashlights.
Did you see how far south that was expected to hit?
I'm just looking at it right now. It seems like this stuff is changing on the fly.
Well, that low pressure system, definitely looking at some websites that I go to, you can see it's there. You know, it's definitely a super low pressure system, but it's not really, I don't know. Where's the moisture? All right. Gary, we are ready.
Okay. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. Our next speaker is Dr. Jade Aguilar. Dr. Aguilar is currently the Director of Research Equity at ECO Northwest, having recently transitioned from her role as Vice President of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Willamette University. She was a professor of sociology and women's and gender studies prior to that. And she has worked with a variety of private and public organizations to offer consultation on community engaged research, institutional change related to equity and inclusion, or as subcontractor providing an equity lens in project-based work. She specializes in research methodologies that promote equity and center community engagement instead of traditional methods that may exacerbate or perpetuate existing inequities. Welcome, Dr. Aguilar, and look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen then. Okay. And let me go to my present mode. Okay, thanks for having me. This is a nice invitation, and I haven't talked to Jen about this next slide, but she's on there. So, well, you already gave me such a lovely introduction that I was about to introduce myself, but I don't have much more to say. I think the only thing I was nervous to say, but since it was clearly absent from my introduction, is that I'm not a planner. And the reason I stuck Jen up here is because so much of the work that I do is done in a team-based environment with folks who are planners. And so it was really helpful to have that kind of equity lens approach, and then work with folks who know, how this stuff works on the ground within cities and communities, and also from Jen's side now as a consultant. So we do a number of equity projects together, and I'm grateful for her reaching out and seeing if this was something I'd be interested in. So I wrote Theory to Practice there because, as an academic, I thought a lot about injustice, inequality, barriers to success, et cetera, but it was all very much from an academic perspective. And moving into the vice president role at my institution gave me that real applied approach to thinking about how to transform an organization to better serve what was an increasingly diverse student body and faculty, and moving from what we used to do, which I imagine is still pretty much the norm in many communities, which is to say, okay, this is how we do it. But since it's not working for everyone, how can we help those people navigate through our system better, right? So we got to give them extra resources or somehow give them some mentorship or support to get through this system that wasn't designed for them, whether that's home ownership or whether that's attaining a college degree or something. And really what I'm trying to help us think about is like kind of a paradigm shift where instead of helping folks navigate through a system that wasn't designed for them, how do we look at that system and say, what do we need to change about the system so we don't have to keep helping folks, you know, get through these barriers. And so I'm hopeful that as much as I'm trying to be practical here, there is a lot of this conceptual work that I think we need to start seeing our work differently in order to start moving through the steps of it differently as well. So I'm going to hopefully touch on that in a number of practical ways as we move forward. Okay. And since we are a small group, I think there's only, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 of you at the most. Please do jump in and ask questions, make comments. There must be a chat feature here somewhere. I don't see it, but if you chat, it probably comes up. So this is a tweet. I wish I could attribute it to someone, but I don't know who wrote it. It was probably somebody who posted it about somebody, but I thought it was, I mean, to me, it's something that makes me think about is that, you know, if you want to understand a problem in America, but it could probably is anywhere, you need to focus on who profits from that problem, not who suffers from the problem. I think, honestly, you could probably see it both ways, but we often look at the folks who have been oppressed or discriminated and trying to start there. I think an equally good place to start is to look at, and where we don't often think to look, as at who is benefiting from the kinds of decisions that we're making, and what can we learn from studying that direction, and not just, you know, at those who have been disadvantaged. Oh, now I see a chat. Okay, chat, there it is. Okay, thank you. How do I make it go away now? Okay. Oh my goodness. Do you all see what I'm seeing on the screen here? Okay, hold on. This is not going well. All right. Yeah. What's that? You see the slides? Well, now this chat is stuck in. Okay, nope, I'm solving my own problem there. Okay. So sorry, this, as Jen knows, this is actually very much my normal personality, so I apologize. We have there's a new kind of thinking about white dominant culture, and sort of again, this focusing on, instead of looking exclusively at, you know, the marginalized communities, what can we know when we start to look at whiteness or white culture, and how does that help us think differently about equity? And so I think that in planning, when I look back historically, we see that the needs, the wishes, the family structure design, and the safety of white middle-class families has been what's been prioritized and subsidized by the US government. And that has often been to the detriment of other kinds of communities that don't fit that typical model, right? And that, I think, fits nicely into what is emerging body of literature around white dominant culture, which is that, you know, the ideas, beliefs, practices, actions of white people tend to be superior to those of people of color, and therefore we are going to, you know, support them and hold them up as our dominant culture. And some examples of this that might resonate with you is, like, you know, when you think about what good parenting looks like, or what a stable family looks like, or what kind of like appropriate professional communications look like, a lot of that is modeled around a white middle-class framework. And so just thinking about that as we think about planning, and so I have in my next slide, you know, sort of a typical American home and a typical American neighborhood, very much like where I also live. And we think about, like, what is the design of the house intended for? Like, you know, when you think about the way houses change over time, it's to support a new way of living that now, in this case, you know, post-COVID, we'll probably see home offices be a big thing. And we know that, you know, master bedrooms with an attached bath and then 2 smaller bedrooms for the kids, like that's just been like the common model, and an assumption that most people will have that kind of family, but very little in the way of creating alternative efforts to think, well, actually, you know, that is actually the minority of families these days. And yet we continue to replicate very much the same style of design and the style of neighborhood. And so just kind of reflecting on the fact that we have these dominant patterns and noticing them, and then starting to say, well, what are we missing when we always go, you know, following the status quo in that way. Okay, keep going. I have 30 slides, so I'm hoping that I can do about half an hour, and then we can open it up for conversation, because I'd really like to hear your thoughts on what you're working on and how you're bringing equity into your own planning. You know, I'm not going to go into these. I think it's really important. I feel like if there's things here that you're looking at and you're like, I don't really know, or I don't know about that in my particular town, it's worth going back and looking. I think that we can't start to think about policy redesigns and resource redistribution unless we can see how we got here, right? So many of these factors shape our communities and who had access to land ownership, home ownership, capital investments for their business, et cetera, and who was marginalized and given either less access, no access, or were forcibly removed at times from the community in order to protect that dominant cultural base. Okay, so for instance, as you know, this is work that's coming out of the University of Washington's Civil Rights and Labor Project. And they're only, last time I talked to the director there, they were only 40% done with King County, but they had just gotten funding to also move into Pierce County and do all of the work there to find out where all the racially restrictive covenants had been written. And, you know, even at 40% done, the list just goes on and on and on and on and on. And thinking about how that has really shaped our communities by recognizing that in all of these places, there were covenants that said, you know, no persons of any race other than white could live there or reside there, or own there or reside there, except if they were an employee in the domestic, as a domestic servant or domestic service. You'll see the different language used different times. So I think that's a really important thing to think about, and how that shaped our communities now, as well as like all of these other things, right? How we did zoning, and what projects we chose for urban renewal and what got destroyed along the way. Okay, so here we are. That's the history, that's the paradigm. And we want to think about like, what can we do? And there's so many layers of this work. And I like this because it helps us think about the multiple approaches that we can take. And right now, I think that you're working at being here in this session, for instance, it's an individual level, right? You're learning, you're educating yourself. You know, anytime you've done a session on unconscious bias, or thinking about, you know, how you internalize your belief systems and reopening your mind to new ideas, I think that's the kind of really important individual level work that we need to start doing. And probably some of your city organizations have brought in folks to help do that kind of work. Additionally, then we get into the interpersonal piece, which is like, how do you work as a workplace and in meetings, and how are you acknowledging the power dynamics that exist there, and how are you calling out, naming and calling out oppressions as you see them. So I think that's an important next step. Most of you are probably working through your work at the institutional and structural level. So thinking about the policies and procedures that you're putting into place within your workplace about the communities that you're serving, those are really important, because they're the ones, you know, if you're making a homeownership assistance program or a down payment assistance program, how you're framing those policies either sets up a barrier to access or eliminates a barrier to access. So if we can think about each of the policies from like an equity perspective about who it might be harming, who's benefiting, you know, who doesn't have access, whose voice wasn't heard, all of that is that institutional level. And then the work amounts to collectively across your organizations to structural level change, which is really what we're aiming for in the end. but you can't get there until you work through the steps that start at, transforming the way that you're seeing the work. Does that make sense? I'm guessing yes. I see. I'm pretending that you're all nodding and smiling. So let's assume. So this is just sort of, I can send these slides to just, thinking about how we respond to biased comments, thinking about inequitable group dynamics, and then at the institutional and the structural levels. And I think structural change is really interesting to me. A lot of it, when we think about it or talk about it, it's this notion that, there's smartphones have been like a major institutional shift or a major structural shift in how we, approach the world, do business, everything. But I can also think of it as a paradigm shift in thinking. And that's what I'm hoping that these kinds of sessions and just our increasing awareness of inequity in society is helping us do, is that we are having that societal paradigm shift that's forcing us to think differently about the work. So this is just me shouting out to you all that I do believe that as planners, you do have a tremendous power to shape policies, programs, and resource allocations. And I think, in that famous quote that with great power comes great responsibility. And so, to not take the time to be thinking about the inequities and how to allocate your resources in equitable ways and how that can help mitigate those big disparities that came from all the historical factors. I don't think then that you're doing your work and using your power as effectively as you can. So this is just me saying, be good. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about equity because it's a word that we use so often, and we use these little images that I think do somewhat justice, but then also leave a lot off the table. So this is a participatory exercise. So hopefully you can join in for a second here. So when we talk about equity, we usually are thinking about this idea about equal outcomes. So that don't rely on something about your cultural or social markers like your race or your gender. And that by removing that, the predictability of success, whether that's health, longevity, or the risk of getting COVID or the ability to buy a home, when we remove when everyone has equal access to that, then we know that the outcomes are fair, right? So that's typically how we think about it. But then we get these slides, and I think this is a less common one. You've probably seen the one with the little boxes where they're watching the baseball game, but I think they're similar, right? So this is saying, like, for instance, these two people were given an equal stool, and yet this equal stool was not sufficient for this person to be able to reach the books. So in order to be equitable, we need to give this person a higher stool, which is more resources, so that they can reach the books. But how might we rethink this whole thing so that we are doing structural change and not this kind of helping someone navigate through an uneven system?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that if you Google equity, and look at images, every one of them seems to be about people being short.
And in fact,
there's also like the apple tree one.
Yeah, true.
One thing that we've tried to do, it's really difficult when you're looking at public engagement. We have started really trying to go, like, for instance, who was it that said it? It was like our department or our local commerce, Chamber of Commerce. He's like, I was just bouncing stuff off him. He's like, you should do it at the grocery store. Everyone, you're going to capture everybody has to go to the grocery store, So we've been thinking about trying to do pop-up, events where we can engage people meaningfully there, and hopefully capturing, and I think I said this before, but I think it was another meeting actually, but it's not so much about like getting the voice, all the time. Like that shouldn't be a measure of success. I think the measure of success is that people know it's happening. and they're provided the opportunity. You know, the old put it in the newspaper, it's not working. You know,
Yeah.
got to find different ways of letting people know that things are happening
Yeah.
and controlling the narrative so that they know that they can make a difference, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Edward, I see that your hand is raised and I hope it's not been up forever.
No, it hasn't. Thanks. I think, you know, maybe to go back on your statement a little earlier, that kind of where I sit in my organization, and I'm a public transit planner, and in my 20+ year career in transportation planning, I really don't have any power to shape policies. I mean, I am guided by elected officials and then directors, and put in my place pretty quickly if I deviate left or right on a matter. I'm just being honest.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful.
You know, and I had to do my own little stool in life. I had to do some pretty horrible things to get where I am right now. So that was my equity stool to get out of the dump that I came from. So this is a very interesting topic, and I'm just trying to, as you go along, I'm trying to turn it into how does this affect what I can do positively in the public transportation.
Yeah, yeah. And I hope that we do get there. Well, I have some slides that I'm hoping resonate with you. And I'm noticing in the chat that Anne is saying, lower the shelf, you know, books on your own device. And it's like, it seems so obvious, right? That like here we are putting the stool on, but these books, well, they seem, you know, it's a shelf, you know, it's fairly stable. It's been built into the wall, but still, it's not impossible to transform that. It's not impossible to lower the shelf or put the books on the floor. Or I haven't heard that one yet, but I love it, right? Like we have the technology now to give both of these people access to the books on their devices. So, you know, I think that that's what we're trying to move from here is like, it's not just about keeping the system and increasing the resources. It's about really trying to lessen the barriers to the system. And I think, you know, that's true in transportation as it is in education or home ownership, you name it. So that's the point here. So we can, I don't know how you draw that. Well, I guess I could, but I'm not a very good drawer.
Lindsay, did you have a question or did your question get answered?
Oh, I was just going to briefly say, as a city council member, when you know Ed's comment about being staff and feeling like you don't have power to change things, I kind of feel the same way as a council member, that alone we don't have the power to change things. I mean, Ben knows I've pushed forward policies, and you know what I get is, oh, that has to go through planning commission and that has to go through staff, and you know the council doesn't write policy. So we have to be working together, you know, elected officials, staff, and the public. And we need at least, you know, what I tell people when they like, why is the city like this? Why can't we change this? I say, you need, you know, willing staff, you need organized public, and you need a majority of the city council. And that's how we get stuff done. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, you know, I saw your hand up, but then I heard talking and your voice wasn't moving. I thought you were just frozen, that was you saying that. Anyway, I love what you just said, because in one of my projects in Beaverton, Oregon, they're looking to work on, they want to invest a lot of money into their downtown area, and they have the money, but they're thoughtful about not doing it without reflecting on what the long-term impacts of that might be. So they have two goals. One is, let's not displace residents or business owners as we reinvest in the downtown. And two, how do we attract and retain more BIPOC business owners to our downtown, because they are the most diverse city in Oregon. And so they really want the downtown to reflect that diversity. And they've been thinking about this for a long time and finally hired us to help them do that work. But they said, as part of their RFP to us, which is, we know where one of our barriers is, and it's city council. So as part of this work, we want there to be included in your scope a training, several part training for the council that helps them understand why equity is important, that helps them understand why we're going to do community engagement differently, and that why this might take longer and why it might cost more, and all of those kinds of things. And that was, I think it was really effective, like that one-on-one working relationship with council and helping them get all their questions answered, so that when the recommendations do come forward, they're ready for it. And I don't know if that's a common thing. I haven't seen that happen in other communities before, but.
Is the Beaverton Council not representative? Is that one of the reasons?
I mean, I think that it is. I just think that, you know, they see that group of people as, you know, I mean, I don't think any city council is necessarily fully representative of the folks in the community. There is a more select group of people who choose to participate in that kind of way. And so I think, yeah, I wouldn't say that they're necessarily representative, and they're not trained in thinking about equity and planning and the intersection of the work, you know, so. But I got to work with them and they were very on board. So I don't want to make it seem like they were a big roadblock. I don't know, the recommendations haven't been come out yet. So we'll see when that actually happens. All right, so here's what I want to talk about. I want to think about how budget priorities can advance equity, how data collection and analysis can advance equity within your communities. Of course, the community engagement piece, and then how do we hold ourselves accountable for the results? And these are not clear buckets, so that you'll see that several of these examples I give from different areas will probably cover several of them, but at least it's a way to organize our thoughts for a moment. Okay. So this is something that's probably you've heard of, equitable budgeting practices, budgeting for outcomes. Sometimes it's called budgeting for equity, but it's the idea that instead of taking last year's budget, you know, as you have to approach this year's budget, making a few tweaks and then sending it off for approval, it's like saying, okay, we're stopping that. We're going to say, what do we want? What are our desired outcomes this year? And then let's work backwards. So the outcomes are what's driving the funding decisions and the performance metrics that we can use to evaluate progress. So I don't know if any of the communities in your division are doing anything like that. I'd be curious to know, but here are some examples. Baltimore, Fort Collins, Roanoke, and the example I'm going to share with you is from Philadelphia. Is this sounding like one of these kind of emerging tools that folks are doing?
I think I'm learning something new right now.
Okay, good. Well, we just hired a new project director at ECHO, and her specialty is finance, particularly in Washington State. And so she's really excited about this because we see this as an opportunity where clients are going to start wanting to do this more and more. So for instance, the city of Philadelphia has these questions that guide their budget decisions, you know, and this is a little bit different than the one I showed you. The next slide will go back to that, but I think there's multiple ways of approaching this. How do we use, you know, what we spend our money on is often a true reflection of what we're valuing. And so when we're forced to confront our budget in a different way, I think that is a really powerful tool. And then here's kind of a little chart that this is, you know, that budgeting for equity or budgeting for outcomes. So, you know, starting with the community and the elected officials, we start with the strategic vision, create a strategic vision, and then work through the budget process into the delivery of the services. How do we measure those outcomes, right? And then, you know, revisit the cycle here. And so in there, kind of key components are the racial equity piece or whatever equity piece you're looking at, the centering from community priorities, which I think goes back to that community engagement piece. And then we have the measurement part, which I think is honestly one of the biggest challenges here, that the data collection piece. And that's one of the areas where I think ECHO does a really good job, but also we're so limited by what data is available. And I think, you know, and we're known for working with big data sets. If you're working at the, you know, city level, what you have access to might not be as comprehensive, and you're working with what you have. And if no one's asked the question, then you don't have the data. So I'm going to move into data because tell me if a hand is raised. Because I think it's one of the areas where a lot of cities are saying we can do this well. Is that me echoing or someone else? Okay, I guess that's me. So Berkeley, oh no, you know what? I
That's
said
the one.
Berkeley, I forgot to change my slide. It's Oakland. Oh, question, yes.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I don't know, with comprehensive planning, I feel like enough, at least in Port Angeles, not enough is done looking at the comprehensive plan for our budget. I mean, Lindsay could chime in on that, but I do feel that we're going through a climate action plan, and I feel like that lens is going to be like our equity lens, our resiliency.
Yeah. And
that I feel like is going to start to change how we look at our budget prioritization. And this could be really foundational for that. I think this is pretty excellent.
Good. Trying to see your name, but I can't. So there's someone else with their hand up. Oops. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I had a question about what happens when there's divergent desires or expectations of outcomes. It's a lot of times, people, it's like you'll see you'll see people's priorities are going in different directions because of the way then you find, okay, people are looking at or wanting completely different outcomes.
I mean, I think the reality is that exists anyway, regardless of if you're starting from outcomes, right? It's like, in the end, if you're not thinking about it, then outcomes are going to happen and people are going to either say, oh, that's a great outcome, or it's not. If you're forced to think about them first, then I think that's where the priority process can come in early. I'm on a project right now that is rewriting the water districting for the city of Portland. So they're taking 4 water districts and they're making them into one, which is going to change the way that we pay fees, right? So right now, disproportionately, the folks that are closest to the river are more impacted by the fact that the levees might break. So now that we have a larger group, the fees that I pay, which are farther from the river, are going to go up. And so we're trying to figure out, well, how are we going to measure that? But since we're forced to do that now, we are putting together our criteria of like, okay, do we do this by, how much impermeable land is on a piece of property? Do we do it by the value of that property? Do we do it by this? Do we do it by that? And that's forcing a group to come together and say, okay, well, what are we prioritizing? How are we going to measure and decide what's most important to us? And equity has risen to the top of that list. So that means that we're going to prioritize equity in how we do this. But yeah, I don't know the answer to that, other than I kind of think it forces the conversation early instead of after. Okay. So it says Berkeley. I'm lying. It's Oakland. I just typed it wrong. This is what they've recently decided they want to be checking for. And I think every, community could have their own list of things that they want to be monitoring and making goals towards outcome progress. And they talk about what data they're going to use to get there. And so, I don't know if this is something that many other communities are doing or starting to do. I have a couple examples as well. But as we think about this, I think there's a lot of reward. There's also a lot of risk. So let me kind of talk about, this idea, right? We know that data aren't neutral, and that all of the data that exists out there are based on somebody deciding that that was important data to collect, somebody deciding how to collect that data. And then whether that's us or someone else analyzing the data, that's also a very subjective action. And how we share the data and how we visualize that and how transparent we are about it is all, human-made decisions. And so we have to know that as we think about what it means to interpret it, right? And there's a lot of history with data collection and data interpretation. We know that data have been and still are used against folks of color and other marginalized communities. I mean, the latest AI stuff or facial recognition or hiring algorithms, all of those are reflecting social biases in the way that, computers are analyzing data. So I think that's just, foundational to how we approach data. Doesn't mean we shouldn't use it. It just means we should be, deeply thoughtful about what it can and can't do and what it does and doesn't mean. So for instance, when we collect, surveys or do engagement, the kinds of questions we choose to ask, how we ask those questions, and how we approach communities in their own language or cultural frameworks, understanding, who might be more resistant to answering those kinds of questions because of stigmas or, social scrutinies or being undocumented or any of those kinds of things, I think are really important. And one example I have on this is the HIMS, the homeless intake form that every county uses. There was an analysis done on the intake form and how it was really reflective of a predominantly white experience. And when they were able to shift the questions to capture more nuance in this way, what they found, they either shifted the way they were asking the questions or what kinds of questions that they were asking. They really learned a lot more about this population of people entering the system for resources. So, I think that's one very thoughtful thing to be always cognizant of as you're collecting data. And then, using, whether it's in data collection or data interpretation, if we don't have input from the folks being studied, then this is where we risk asking the wrong questions. It probably, that HMIS revision probably came from a group of folks who were like, well, you never asked me that, or, I didn't want to answer that because of this. It was really working with the member. Otherwise, we don't know what we don't know, right? And then a few other just important things. I think this is a really important one, is acknowledging the systemic reasons for disparities. So we're going to see, if you look in your communities, you're going to see disparities across race or other factors. And you could just put those out there and say, I keep using the homeownership example, I'll continue to use it. We're on a big homeownership project right now. There's disparities across race and homeownership. Well, if you just put that data out there and you don't interpret it meaningfully, you will let people make their own meaning, right? So we have to provide context, or it will reinforce for folks who aren't, who haven't thought deeply about the systemic issues themselves, these harmful narratives that attribute racial disparities on educational attainment or grades to inadequate or inferior behaviors by those communities or those individuals, instead of the structural reasons that are causing this. So that's just, I think we talk a lot about data transparency, putting, data out on the website, but also, contextualizing that is important. Okay. So
Jade, sorry for interrupting. Could you say a little bit more about narrative? Because I didn't really start learning about things like race class narrative till the last couple of years. And I think those kinds of frameworks are really valuable for us to understand as people communicating to the public, like why sometimes we get the wrong response when we say something.
Well, say more about that, like that you would get the wrong response by saying something like you just, because here I'm reflecting on like posting about, I don't know, like discipline rates from your local schools, right? And when you just see the discipline rates, and we're going to see, like, for instance, that young Black men are disciplined more often than, white high schoolers. And so you could read into that of like, wow, we have a problem in our school system that we're, disproportionately targeting men of color. Or you could read it as like, wow, young Black men must be really behaving poorly. And without framing that, people are just going to make their own interpretation. And so I think that you can't just throw data out there and without contextualizing what it looks like. But I'm not sure that I answered your question, but you gave me a thumbs up, so I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yeah, just that, the data doesn't sit on its own, but also the way that we tell the story really matters for the outcome that people come to. There's a framework, I guess I'll just leave it for folks, called Race Class Narrative, that's been developed by the organization Demos and others. Okay. And it's really valuable for looking at how we talk about what's happening in policy decisions within government today.
Cool. I'll check it out. I haven't heard of that. So DEMOS?
Demos, like people, yeah, demos, DEMOS.
Okay. Okay, so this is, Tacoma is doing this. I think a lot of communities are doing it. King County also has a whole like equity mapping, health equity map for their county, and using different variables and putting it on the website, because part of the interpretation, should emerge from the folks who are experiencing the inequity. So by giving the community the tools to see this, there's more opportunity for folks to self-engage and organize and start to make also progress. And Tacoma did an interesting thing, which I haven't really seen other communities do, but I think it's, I'm intrigued by it, which is to flip the color scheme. So where we typically see red as areas of, potentially high risk or high vulnerability, here they've chosen to use red as this is like the high opportunity area where there's more access and more resources and more privilege there. And kind of in order to again, frame the narrative, which is, that communities, at-risk communities often see themselves in this like red zone, and that starts to create a reinforcing narrative about, their own potential for opportunity, or, always feeling like you're in this, like, this area where, you're disadvantaged. And so by changing it, we're saying, and again, I think this is back to that original tweet, like, let's focus in on what is going on here with all of the high opportunity, and how can we get other folks to access that too. So, okay. I tried to look today whether Washington had like a state data strategy. All I could find is that you don't have a chief data officer at the state. So that doesn't mean you don't have a state data strategy, but this is from this is from the state of Oregon. So I'm imagining that right now, much of your data is siloed, reporting is fairly informal and ad hoc. That seems to be like a common city level thing, right? So some of you have this data and others of you have this data. And, across cities and then states and then organizations, we don't have a good way to integrate that data. And so I think a lot of governments now are trying to figure out, okay, how do we meaningfully integrate data without risking the privacy of our, of being ensuring that the kind of confidentiality and privacy. I mean, there's so much we can learn from integrating data. And there's also ways in which it could be like pretty scary for folks who are now linked in all of these ways. But when done well and with an equity lens, we know that data can be critical to long-term strategies. And, if we implement that community feedback loop and we share it in appropriate ways and, sensitive ways, it's going to be a real benefit to us in how to think long-term about where we should be heading and what those outcomes can look like. Okay, I'm getting close here, but I feel like we're talking along the way, so please stop me. Okay. And then of course this, the community priorities piece, all of this, even though it came up as number 3, I think we all kind of have gotten this far, which is community engagement matters. Community engagement that's more than a check the box exercise is even better. Ideally, we build long-term relationships with organizations and community groups and community-based organizations, nonprofits, et cetera, across time and across division, right? So that we don't have the Parks and Rec division making these relationships, and then the housing folks are coming in and saying, well, we need to do community engagement, and then tapping those same folks who are like, didn't we just talk to you like a month ago? And so kind of centralizing that, making it long-term, and then eventually allowing for those community priorities to be the ones that are shaping the framework of where the cities are going to go. But that's not where most that's not where most cities are at. And so I think being honest with that too, because I think it's does a disadvantage to sort of take that narrative of like, oh, we want all of our decisions to be based in community priorities, and then it turns out that they're not, and they're like, do we really, like, this is what we're going to do, what, no matter what the community is going to say. So then don't ask them for their comments, just because you're going to do it anyway. That's why I see them like, like when we talked to Beaverton, we had a really honest conversation about how involved is the city going to be here? Because if you're going to make some decisions, then maybe the minimum that you're going to do is inform them of those decisions. Or maybe you're going to inform them of the decisions and get their feedback so that you can make some small changes to those. But it's not like, what would you like? There's that whole like community-based budgeting model too, where it's like, folks are really going to get to weigh in on that. A lot of places are not ready for that. I think you have to have those long-term established relationships before you move into that. Let's let them help us build our budget. Okay, and then this is my last example. This comes out of the city of Providence, Rhode Island. And I thought it was a really interesting kind of measure of accountability. So the mayor there put together, this is last July, this declaration on truth, reconciliation, and reparations. It's a long document. I just pulled out a few kind of key, there's some folks in the chat, but I will circle back to that. So a few key paragraphs that I thought were interesting. So first, it talks about that they are going to commit to researching, documenting, and the kind of the history of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and that they're going to look at the laws, specifically the state and municipal laws that discriminated against folks, and then other kinds of discrimination, such as housing discrimination, financial practices, et cetera. So do like a deep dive into like, how are we complicit in this inequity? And then once they've done that, they want to think about educating the community on what they have found, and then finally moving to consider recommendations that will help mitigate that long historical, the factors that got them there. So actively eliminating state and local laws, which are probably mostly eliminated, but then I think enacting new policies and laws that will help reduce the disparities. So I thought that was an interesting, like commitment that a city would make. I don't know if I don't know if this is like rare or if this is becoming a kind of a model that other cities are following. Does anyone know of any other examples?
This is Luke. The city of Port Townsend did something fairly recently to address some of their old laws, but for the most part, it seemed like these are more symbolic measures than substantive measures. And it was also part of the Chetzemoka Trail dedication. So you had a lot of folks coming out who were participating or felt like they were participating in a cultural event. And the city of Port Townsend made a public declaration abandoning a 120-year-old law that prohibited Squamish Indians from being unaccompanied in Port Townsend city limits or something like that, which symbolically, sure, it's great for folks to learn, but at the end of the day, it seems like we need less symbolic and more substance.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm all for symbolic for sure. Like, I do think there's some power and some value in that, but if it is not followed by the substantive, then it feels, I mean, it's I don't know, it feels gross and disingenuous and performative,
No, it was actually almost just a shocking realization that law hadn't been officially repealed. So it was a substantive event that had a symbolic kind of official motion in it.
Yeah. Edward.
Yeah, this is probably way off topic because I'm a transit planner and not a urban planner. But one of the problems with federal law, if you're familiar with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, that works really well in most parts of the country. And I've done transit planning on the East Coast and in California. But coming up here, I found in Kitsap County specifically, while we look at Title VI very closely, the environmental justice side doesn't have as much teeth in terms of enforcement that Title VI has. So one of the problems we have in Kitsap is we have a lot of low income areas that are very much, there isn't like one race dominant here or one race dominant there. And I'm not able to really bring that to the table at a staff level to try to serve those lower income communities well. And we have a budding transit providers who cut service to the low income communities and provide greater service to the higher income community. And we have no way to complain. We have no way to make this a better environment for equity for the low income neighborhoods here in Kitsap. Where in Title VI doesn't really address them because they're not like mostly non-white, they're mostly white. So what do I do? Do I just ignore it?
I mean, I think this is one of the big challenges with these, you know, federal laws that sometimes we're, you know, like one of the struggles that I have is a lot around fair housing laws. And I'm not, you know, opposed to fair housing laws. It just now when we want to make policies that deal with racial inequity, we are limited by the fair housing laws. And I think what you're suggesting is that in similar ways that they're, you know, we aren't comprehensive enough in what we're talking about when we think about equity. And yeah, that there are a lot of communities struggling with transit or anything else. And because we don't have the teeth behind the law, or the law prohibits us from focusing on certain elements and social factors, then we're limited. And I mean, I feel like this is going to be one of the things that's going to emerge in the court systems soon. I don't know if this is the right court for it to emerge in, but I think we're going to see these kinds of issues working their way up the court systems from, you know, the local to the Supreme Court levels soon enough. And maybe they already have. And we've seen this at least in Oregon with the COVID relief stuff that was, you know, targeted to certain populations, and then the pushback that got. And yeah, it's a challenge. I agree.
Yeah, and Kitsap is such an interesting area because most of the population is so new, historically speaking. Yeah. And when I look at the census data in terms of distribution of people based on how the census, you know, breaks out people's ethnicity and race, it's very peppered compared to a lot of other parts of the country where there's deep concentrations here or there, or great divisions, you know, racial divisions that I see. I don't see that so overtly. It's probably a lot more buried, or, you know, there might be other things I don't see because I'm just not well educated, you know?
Yeah. Okay, this is my last slide. So then I'll shut this down. We can see each other, but, you know, I mean, I could have written 1,000 of these. And I think this is the hard part about giving these kind of what I mean by practical approaches to equity. There are just so many of them that it's, you know, we could have done this on the whole thing about transportation or other things, but if I have to name a few, you know, I think these are some of them, and I'm sure you have many others, but none of this is going to be, you know, new to you. I think we're seeing a lot of movement on a lot of these areas too, except for the affordable housing, which consistently is one of the biggest challenges that I think the state of Washington and many other places is facing. Like we just saw what happened in California and the new laws that they came up with there. I'm not sure if in Kitsap County and areas like that, there's still that same issue that there is in the bigger cities, probably. All right, so I'm gonna stop the sharing, and I wish does anyone know how to save this chat so that I can get all these links that you've all put in here?
Yeah, I can request. Usually, there's like a data dump when you get a recording. It's just like an Excel file. It'll have the name and the thing, so I can definitely get that for everybody too, because I do think that's really, there's a lot of valuable stuff there for sure. I guess I had a couple of thoughts while going through this, like, how do we make equity not a box that we check? You know, that's the biggest fear that I have. Yeah. And how do we make sure that our elected officials and our directors and those that have the purse keys know that it may get a little bit less expensive in the future, but for right now, like you have to put a lot of budget into engaging people so that you can do it meaningfully.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody has any advice for me, but thankfully, with this climate action process, we were able to go back to council and say, hey, we want to do this meaningfully.
Mhm.
Give us more money. And they did.
Yeah.
Thank you. But, that's a huge barrier too.
I mean, I
honestly.
think, I did more work with private industry before I worked with government, but I think what was effective there was the bottom line, argument. Because, I mean, they're for profit. And I think differently, but similarly, government can invest in equity because it does have the outcomes that cities are looking for, right? So if you put into economic development in ways that are more meaningful and ways that aren't just like, how many jobs did we create this year? Then we can say how many jobs that were, of living wage, and who had access to those jobs, and how do we prioritize, workforce trainings that get those folks out of, the same kind of at-risk jobs where they all lost them during COVID, and we get folks into different places. It actually ends up being better for the city. So I don't know if those are the kind of like arguments that move from just like it's the right thing to do to here's how in the end we will be a stronger city, and we will be able to attract talent here and all of those kinds of things. And those are the arguments I think that aren't really that hard to make. It's just we have to be thoughtful about what are those long-term outcomes? How does the racial wealth gap and lowering that actually mean a lot more for how this is going to look in 100 years in our communities? And it's getting worse. It's not getting better, right? So I think that's an issue. Lindsay.
I want to pause because I spoke a few times during your presentation, which was fantastic, by the way. So
Okay.
thank you so much. So about housing specifically, I've been perplexed over the few years that I've been proposing different housing policies or talking about it, about how much people resist affordable housing. And it doesn't make sense to me. And as all the planners here know, like there's this argument that affordable housing reduces adjacent property values, which is completely unsupported and needs to be challenged every time somebody says it. But that keeps coming up. And I'm like, why does this myth keep coming up to stop us from doing what we know is right? And then I read Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America, which is one of several fantastic books on housing policy in the 20th century. And after reading that, I realized, at least to me, and this is kind of a critical view, is that it's because when we say affordable housing, people think, I should be clear, white people in our community think Black people. When we say multifamily housing, white people in our community think Black people. I think there's a reason that the white picket fence is a white fence. And I think in some ways we could change our language, not that that's alone enough, but to not trigger the this emotional, deep, implicit racism that people have if they're older and live through probably 1960s housing policy. About what we mean when we're talking about apartments. And so one thing that I've been trying to do is when somebody starts complaining about renters, I just imagine that they're complaining about Black people. And so I'm just, in their sentences, I replace the word renter with Black person or Black family, and just listen to what they're saying. Because in Clallam County, while 27% of white households are renter households, 97% of Black households are renter households. So almost every Black family in Clallam County is a renter household. And then the other thing I've been trying to do is not say single family and multifamily, for housing, because I think those words trigger a lot of emotional response that doesn't make sense when we're talking about housing. So I've been trying to say, instead of single family, say detached housing or standalone housing, and instead of multifamily, say connected housing, or name the specific type, apartment, garden court, duplex, etc. But I think that in some ways the language we're using is helping to trigger emotional responses that have implicit connections in racist housing policy that people don't even know they're doing. But that's my challenge, since this is a planning meeting, to, let's change our language about housing and maybe ditch a lot of this, frankly, blatantly racist housing policy that, the planning profession as a whole was a big part of creating. And I say that recognizing I'm not a planner, I'm a lawyer. The lawyers have done all of that ourselves. We are even more culpable than planners. But since we're talking about planning, let's change the planning language.
Yeah, that's a
Gary.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Gary, yeah.
Gary, but I just wanted to step in real quick before Gary makes his comment and say to Lindsay that I have done everything in my power to get rid of that term because I hate it too. But I got pushback because of the way that the state definitions are and that sort of thing. So I fully support it. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah, I appreciate your presentation. It's but things have advanced considerably since I was in school. I mean, they, and back a long time ago, they just blatantly said that if someone Black or Hispanic or whoever moved into your neighborhood, that your property values were going to decrease. It was just blatant. And the problem is that racism has been baked into our economic system from the beginning, and it's hard to decouple and dismantle that. And people do need history lessons. They don't understand that it's been tangled up for 2 or 3 centuries, and and dismantling it is going to take systematic effort as well as individual effort. You have to be willing to change language, and you have to be willing to do business differently, and you have to be willing to look at different economic models if you want things to change. Because quite frankly, the way we do housing is I mean, the way we do housing and the way we do school, the outcome is almost the outcome is predictable. So if you want a different outcome, you have to, you have to kind of unplug certain things that push those things forward.
Yeah, great comments. I agree. I know we're at time. I didn't know if anyone had any final comments.
I was going to say, if everybody's interested, we could just keep going until 5 because I'm on the clock until then. I don't know. I'm fine with continuing the conversation if everybody else is. I wanted to say that Gary and I have talked about this offline a couple of times, and I seriously just really appreciate his opinion on the matter and his experience on the matter too. It's been really helpful for me.
I'll chime in and just say I really appreciate the comment about, it's going to take a long time. I mean, we've had a very racist society for a long time, for 100 years. Jade, you know better, maybe 200 years, and it's going to be incremental type of planning effort to tackle different aspects of equity and work on what you can work on and just keep at it.
Yeah, there's always going to be some resistance, I feel like, but what we can do is just continue to, part of the process that we go through every single time is provide that education. Again, like, it's not always about getting the voice. It's sometimes just about letting them know that something is happening and why it's happening. And like you said, with the narrative, it's really important that you frame it the way you do. Like, for climate action, our community, we decided that, maybe they don't care as much, or they'll just dismiss climate action because of that dirty word. So we've really done the best we can to frame this process as a resilience process where we're Port Angeles, we're independent. How do we become more independent? How do we pay less taxes? How do we make sure that our infrastructure is sustainable and working for us, and we don't have to be overburdened by those things? And I think we're just starting the engagement process, but I think that's going to really help get people involved so that they're not just immediately dismissive of a process. I'm sure it's not wholly unique, but it is a little weird. We have to do it that way. But we've had to retrain Cascadia. Like Cascadia gave, I was like, guys, we can't have the moniker be like fist in the air in the land of hypocrisy. We have to reframe this so that our residents are receptive to it. So they've had to retrain the way that they look at equity as well, which has been kind of amusing for us because we're just this weird outpost out here of independent thinkers that are independently thinking, I guess.
All right, so Edward and Ann had their hand up.
Yeah, I just want to maybe share a very, very quick story. Might explain some of my comments before. I come from a kind of a strange background for planners that I've found, and I grew up in one of the white flight suburbs of Boston, where people fled. I was a learning disabled kid, so I wasn't able to go to college right away. So I joined the military, met a ton of different types of people, a lot of people who joined the military to get around some of those racial barriers that our nation. A lot of people from Baltimore, near where I was stationed. They were getting away from just really difficult conditions. And so I learned a lot about this just firsthand. So it's a very passionate and emotional subject for me because I ended up going to war with a lot of these people. And to, I don't know, it's just really, really hard to talk about. And then when I try to do things in my job in public transit, make things better, and I run into barriers at the staff level, it's incredibly frustrating. To the point where I'm ready for a career change and maybe something a little more positive. But I just wanted to share that, to get some background of why my comments might quite gel with everything.
Yeah, it's very taxing work. I mean, I left my last job because, for several reasons, and the excitement about this job, but there was, I just found it to be emotionally depleting to be constantly pushing this boulder up a hill. And, I think that's where that spectrum from that individual to structural, if you're dealing with people who can't, or won't do the work at the individual level and have positions of power, it's hard. How do you navigate through that really strong barrier and to keep, trying to make change. And so I think, finding a place where, people are excited alongside you to do the work is probably really important for you to, stay motivated and be able to feel like as Jen said, it's going to take a long time, even when we're all trying, much less trying to work around those who are choosing to not see it or don't want to change the status quo. So
one last thing, and I won't say anything else. On a positive note, as much as I hate the West Coast, you guys are way ahead. I mean, so far ahead on this than where I grew up. So far ahead.
Interesting.
I mean, I still feel what I saw.
Yeah.
I wasn't the victim. I just saw it, right? And it just.
Yeah. Anne, I know, I don't know if you still have your comment, but if you want to jump in, okay.
Hi, I'm just popping in to say hello and thank you for this presentation and for your comments and for the rest of you sharing your experiences. And as we look at the changes to the housing element and the requirements to look at equity, and especially looking at things such as infrastructure investment, I'm encouraged that there'll be more resources for you, and that we're looking forward to working with communities to help you do this work. And it's actually required in Washington State now. So amazing, amazing Washington State.
Yeah, Washington State's doing really great work. And in fact, we just got the local contract with Washington State Department of Commerce to work on the housing disparities, reducing home ownership disparities in Washington State. So it's exciting.
Congrats.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. Well, it's inspiring to be around a group of folks who are taking, this very seriously and working to think about ways to embed it into your planning work. I really appreciate that. And it's the reason why I'm loving this new work, is getting to work with folks who, I always get the projects where equity is built into the title and therefore the main focus of the subject. So I kind of have this like skewed view that this is where all planning is heading. But I think it's a confirmation bias that, I end up only doing the work where equity is a main component. There's probably a lot of others out there too. So
I think a good litmus test is always like the National Planning Conference or the state conference. And
okay.
To be perfectly honest, 10 years ago, it was like bicycles, trees. And now it's like, no, we need to do some serious stuff here.
Yeah.
It's like, it's almost, it's, a little overwhelming, and it's, it's emotionally draining too. And it's just a major component of what we're learning, Lindsay said kind of like, whoa, what did we do? Like, this is our fault. We let this happen. And so we're having to rethink the way that we do everything, basically, which is a good thing, that whole paradigm shift. And it manifests in so many different ways, basically. It's one of those overwhelming problems. That's why we've been trying to focus on it as much as possible through these too, because when it gets overwhelming, you just figure, well, what can I do?
And I just want to give a shout out to Jade for doing this whole presentation. I kind of volunteered her and I feel a little bad, but I just love working with her, and she has a lot of great knowledge. And I think one of the things that's a struggle is that we don't have a lot of examples of what's working in different jurisdictions, and then understanding that those lessons learned and what was hard, and kind of having some of that support is just really important. So the more we can share about our experiences and what we're working on, and some new ideas, I think the better it will be. And it will be that those resources can be, you might be able to use them in the future as well. So I just want to emphasize that, this sharing is really important, and a big shout out to Jade for doing this.
Yeah, this has been great.
Thanks so
I will
much.
say that all the examples that I have seen, at least in the recent past, have either been extremely expensive or extremely time intensive. Mm-hmm. And so a part of this is like reminding our leadership and directors and whoever that it's essential, and how are we going to, I can't do it all.
Right.
We need more help. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And thanks, Jen, for the invite. And it was lovely to meet you all.
Thank you, Jade.
Thank you, Jade.
Appreciated. Will you be sending your presentation to us?
Sure, I'll send it to Ben.
Okay,
great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Much
Take care.
appreciated.
Bye-bye.
All right, everyone, thank you for sticking around, and I'll see you on the flip side as not president. I'll see you all later. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ben.